When the Iraq War happened and George Bush said, we're going to get these folks, Noam Chomsky had just written a feature for the New York Times, I think. Okay, this has happened. How has it happened? Why has it happened? And plotted, history, oil, who was supporting who was enabling who was weaponizing who, etc. And just looking at the story. So to gain understanding of the situation, George Bush's response was, if you understand them, then you're one of them. It's that overview thing about the ability to see all the way round and to say, yeah, I don't agree with that. Obviously, I don't condone it. We have to be able to understand. And that's, for me, is intelligence, I think.
AI, in its wildest science fictional imagination, or the way tech bros talk about it, must be possible, right? Like, it can exist. Do any of the things that actually exist at present manifest that in a way that I find to be meaningful and true? No.
I think that the universe is an intelligent entity and that actually consciousness is the only thing that's real.
What do we mean when we talk about intelligence? Do computers have it? What about plants, animals, or politicians? What about our planet, or even the universe? Search Google for the most intelligent people who ever lived, and you'll find plenty of websites and blogs with lists of reputed geniuses, some even ranked according to their staggeringly high IQs. Names most commonly thrown up are unsurprising. Galileo, Da Vinci, Einstein, Isaac Newton, Stephen Hawkin, all men, all Western, all united by their contributions to science. Newton often comes top of many polls, and would doubtless have had a huge IQ and clearly had a brilliant scientific mind. Yet he was also antisocial, reclusive and obsessive. Some have suggested he suffered from OCD. Newton worked all his life. He had no hobbies, and he never married. He didn't have much compassion or time for his fellow man. Newton's life would not have been a very happy one for the likes of you and I, or a very loving one.
Run your bath, sir. Your bath's ready, sir. Professor Parkin?
Thank you.
Shall I turn down your bed, sir?
Turn down the bed. Turn down the bed.
Bumbling academic Professor Parkin, played there by Michael Hordern in the BBC adaptation of M.R. James' classic, A Whistle and I'll Come to You, My Lad. Absent-minded, lost in thought, detached from reality, covered in dandruff, yet still an enduring archetype for an intellectual. Why is our idea of intelligence so skewed towards one way of thinking and being? How did IQ come to be our standard measure for intelligence? How might we go about reimagining intelligence in Newtopia? Big questions for one episode, but with the help of our eminent guests, James Bridle, Emma Kilbey and John Lloyd, none of whose IQs we could give two hoots about, let's see what we can uncover. Sitting comfortably? Seatbelts on? We're off on another adventure in Newtopia. With me, David Brownlow. This podcast is sponsored by the Order of Bards, Ovates and Druids. No, really. In 1905, two French psychologists, Alfred Binet and Theodore Simon, created a test to identify children who might need special attention in schools. It became known as IQ, Intelligence Quotient, and offered a collection of problems to measure cognitive abilities, visual spatial skills, and problem solving. In the late 19th and early 20th century, these factors were considered to be at the root of human intelligence. IQ was never designed or intended to be used as a global measure, but over the decades, that's what happened. In the darkest moments of the 20th century, the Nazis authorized the murder of children with low IQs. In the 1940s, the state of Virginia passed a law allowing for the forced sterilization of adults with low IQs. Today, across many parts of the world, the military still use IQ as part of their screening for recruits, as do some educational establishments.
You've got to have a minimum IQ of 70 to be a Spanish soldier. Did you know that? It used to be 90, but they couldn't recruit enough people. So,
John Lloyd there, who we'll meet properly in a bit. I've never done an IQ test in my life, so I thought I'd begin by inviting a friend, Emma Kilbey, who I consider a smart cookie, over to my house, and we'd do an IQ test together. Emma is a polymath. She acts, directs, sings, does comedy. She's a specialist in diversity and inclusion training. She's a qualified coach. She's creative. She understands people. She's got a big heart. She's funny. Emma is super smart as far as I'm concerned. And I thought she'd be a good person to do an IQ test with, not to compare results, but to get her take on its limitations and see what ideas she might have around intelligence.
Where am I going?
You are going to mensa.org.uk. To qualify for membership of Mensa, you must demonstrate an IQ in the top 2%, either through taking our supervised test or submitting prior evidence.
Yes.
So we're going to do this. So we're not doing an IQ test per se. We're doing a test to see how well we might do in an IQ test. Mainly the reason for doing this is because the Mensa test is 45 minutes and we can't be bothered to sit and do this.
And it's also 13 English pounds.
It's £13. And as you're my guest, that essentially is £26 out of my budget, which pretty much clears the bank account for this episode.
I feel nervous. It says the word hypotenuse at any point, I'm out.
Well, it's a type of flower, I can tell you that. Shall we do it?
Yes.
Here we go. 3, 2, 1, go.
It's amazing, isn't it? Because I instantly feel like a dum-dum.
I mean, some of these questions are ridiculous. Like, this is just whether or not you know the meaning of a word.
Yeah.
What's that got to do? That's got nothing to do with intelligence.
I can sort of feel that I've got some of these wrong.
As predicted, the IQ workout threw up questions around pattern recognition and number sequences, but also synonyms and definitions of words. It asked, hive is to be as den is to zebra, lion, cat or elephant. Well, either you know it or you don't. Enjoyment means the same as satisfaction, amusement, relaxation, pleasure or entertainment. Well, Oxford Dictionary lists relaxation, amusement and entertainment all as viable synonyms for enjoyment. It also asked, what word doesn't belong in this list? Stream, river, brook, lake, creek. Brook and creek are fairly specific to British and American English. If you were Northern Irish, you'd be more familiar with the word burn. It is problematic. I thought a lot of the questions had absolutely nothing to do with intelligence. Like, so you need to know that a lion has a den, as opposed to an elephant or a cat or anything like that. But I wonder whether we do another one.
I don't want to do another one. I find it depressing. I find being tangible like this and pinning stuff down, for me, I find it offensive. I get it with the shapes, I get that. I think I probably fell down on the shapes, because I tell you something that I'm not very good at. Things like, you know when you get shoes in a shoebox and they're facing, and then you put them back in the shoebox the way that they came? It takes me ages.
I'm like that too.
My sister's the same.
I'm even worse,
really
learning dance steps. I find it really, really difficult.
Noticed,
yeah. Afterwards, I did try a different 25-minute IQ test via Mensa, which was entirely driven by problem solving around the sequencing of shapes and number patterns. It was fun for a few questions, and then it just got less interesting as it went along. The questions got harder through the addition of more and more elements to the sequencing patterns. It reminded me of old computer games like Tomb Raider, where, the levels get harder and harder, but ultimately revolve around the same ideas. But this was all after Emma had left. Beforehand, I asked her how the test had made her feel.
I sort of wormholed back to being in a maths class with Mr. Jacobs, who would just sort of randomly point at people and say, and the answer is, and throw the board rubber at you if you didn't get it. So basically it's a stress response. The brain is designed to survive. So if it's put under pressure, it will go to the very basics of survival. You lose the ability to access your higher order thinking. So when we put kids in a test environment, because it doesn't resemble where they learnt the material, they're just trying to survive it. So they get fight or flight. And that's why you can't, turn your paper over, write your name. Can't remember my name. because you're in a stress response. So that's how I felt. These kind of conversations are so interesting because they bring in experience, they bring in what we project onto the world, the lenses we look through. That to me is much more interesting than sort of tangible, concrete responses to things. Because, you know, like we were saying while we were doing it, some of it is you either know that or you don't. That's not interesting at all, is it?
The truth is, IQ tests measure only one thing, which is the ability to do IQ tests.
John Lloyd is a veteran TV and radio comedy producer and the creator of QI. John has a brilliant mind on him. He's also smart enough to know the importance of keeping an open mind to things.
The other thing about intelligence is, so what? Intelligence is a bit like height, you know. It's like you didn't earn your intelligence. You've got this thing that you say you can do IQ scores. You didn't earn being 6'2" or whatever you are. That what you earn is doing things where you are overcoming yourself. Knowing you were going to ask me about intelligence, I looked up on the Q database, and there's a wonderful scientist called Alan Kay, who's quite famous, who says a change in perspective is worth 80 IQ points. And that's my philosophy, which is, you know, that thing of coming top and measuring and winning quizzes and things. No, what you need to do is change your perspective, have an original idea, mate. You know, start being kind, start realising that some of it's your fault, those sort of things. Those are things that matter. It's certainly true that people with very high IQs tend to be more likely to win Nobel Prizes and, you know, really, really difficult stuff, you know, mathematicians. But when it comes to daily life, you know, somebody with an IQ of 160 you can't socialise them. I mean, they don't understand why you don't see that everything that they can see is obvious.
Yeah.
We've got a guy at QI who's got a maths PhD. This guy's tried to explain his PhD in lattice theory to me 40 times. I still can't get to first base. It's just impossible. But as I say, it's different kinds of intelligence. Asimov tells this great story about his motor mechanic that he used to have. You know? And he used to go around thinking, well, this guy's a bit of an idiot. He's probably only got an IQ of about 80 and I'm much more bright than him. He's never written a book, for example. But every time Asimov's car broke down, he had no spatial awareness. He had no idea how to fix it. He took it to this guy, and the guy would go under the hood, and, you know, 10 minutes later, he fixed the car. And it took Asimov years to realize that actually this guy's really smart. If I had his job, I would be a disaster. It's just a different kind of smartness, you know. Yeah, we're dominated by the left side of the brain, which is, you know, linear, obsessed by detail, verbal, all that kind of thing. And the right-hand side is the thing that sees the big picture, the holistic side of things, which is imaginative, intuitive, you know, questioning. You think of a bricklayer, you know, it's not enough just to do the beautiful thing of bricklaying. It's a beautiful thing to watch, you know, swiping the mortar off and then the next brick and breaking one in half and doing the corner and all that. You've got to be going towards the whole house, you know, you're doing it for a reason. And I was a builder in my gap year, you know, long-haired lefty, you know, came out of public school thinking this is all shit, and went to work for an Essex builder with a bunch of blokes, and got teased rotten, of course, for being a toff and not being able to do anything, you know, and they have to teach me absolutely everything. You watch an electrician and a plumber and you know, working out how to rewire a house. I mean, it's way beyond what I could do. The sense of the creativity, the, you know, thinking on their feet, you know, the expertise, the natural skill that they've learned.
I think what we tend to do is assume intelligence as well, all the way round. What I mean by that is in IQ versus EQ, you know, which is the emotional quotient, if you like. So you might meet someone who's absolutely, you know, what you would call a genius in their field, who's very articulate and eloquent and sophisticated in their intelligence, but has the emotional intelligence of a 6-year-old. And that always stuns me because it really shows to me that they're two different things. They're like sliders on a mixing desk. You know, you might have the intelligence, inverted commas, way higher than the emotional intelligence. And that's about understanding the impact of behaviour. There was a chap called Howard Gardner, back in the 80s, I think it was, who came up with this idea of multiple intelligences. In a way, as a response to this whole idea of IQ being king, that you can't just measure somebody's worth, because that's what it feels like it equates to. You know, if we're talking about people being literally exterminated if they've got a lower IQ. So there's bodily kinesthetic, which is coordinating mind and body. So a football player.
Drummer.
Yeah, exactly. Naturalist, being good with living things, understanding and reading nature. Spatial, so visualizing the world in 3D. Linguistic, verbal linguistic, finding the right words, being a good communicator, being a good writer. Intrapersonal, which I think is fascinating. So it's understanding yourself, being able to reflect, being able to go down in the diving bell and make sense of your own responses and thoughts, feelings. Interpersonal, so sensing other people's needs and feelings. Logical, mathematical, quantifying things, making hypotheses, etc. Musical, and existential, why are we here type thing. So we still don't value those enough. We'll say someone's good at something, but it's not. People get far more excited about people going to university or, you know, passing tests or whatever.
It's good to acknowledge different types of intelligence and blind spots in our relationships. In my relationship with my partner Anne, I tend to be funnier and a much better cook. Anne is really good at DIY and spatial awareness, so we've worked out how to acknowledge these differences of intelligence and really play to our strengths. Anne! Come and sit down. You must be knackered putting all those shelves up.
Ow! Oh! Ow! Ow!
Are you alright? What are you doing? You just walked straight into the table. That's going to leave a bruise. Look, sit down. I've made you your favourite chocolate Guinness cake.
Ugh! Ugh!
What's up?
Ugh! Ugh! Is there fish in this?
Yeah, well, just a little bit. I thought you liked fish.
Ugh! Jesus, it's disgusting.
Was that your new shelves?
Hey, is this sketch supposed to be funny?
Stupid tape here. The educationalist Sir Ken Robinson, in the world's most watched TED Talk, reminds us that our academic systems in the West still derive from curriculums developed during the Industrial Revolution and remain geared towards what he calls making university professors who see their bodies as mere transport for their heads. The arts, he also points out, are always given the lowest status in schools, and in the hierarchy of the arts, dance and movement are usually at the bottom. Why is it, Robinson asks, that dance is not given the same level of importance as maths in our schools? Just like Emma, Robinson points out that there are myriad ways of considering intelligence. He also points out the limitations of reducing different types of intelligence to a list.
We need to radically rethink our view of intelligence. We know three things about intelligence. One, it's diverse. We think about the world in all the ways that we experience it. We think visually, we think in sound, we think kinesthetically, we think in abstract terms, we think in movement. Secondly, intelligence is dynamic. The brain isn't divided into compartments. In fact, creativity, which I define as the process of having original ideas that have value, more often than not, comes about through the interaction of different disciplinary ways of seeing things.
Listening to John, Emma and Ken Robinson, I'm reminded of a conversation with Daisy Campbell in Series 1 on the theme of reality tunnels, in which Daisy posits yet another definition of intelligence as being the extent to which each of us are able to acknowledge that our beliefs are a construct. It's time, however, to extend our ideas about intelligence beyond the human. For an episode exploring our relationship with the idea of intelligence, it will be folly to ignore our current concerns about AI. Many people seem to genuinely fear that AI will take over our jobs, our lives, and eventually the world.
Open the pod bay doors, Hal.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that. I know that you and Frank were planning to disconnect me. And I'm afraid that's something I cannot allow to happen.
Where the hell did you get that idea, Hal?
Dave, although you took very thorough precautions in the pod against my hearing you, I could see your lips move.
What about Buck?
It's nice to have at least one friend. I'm sorry, Tweaky. Two friends.
What a bummer.
In the clip we just heard from the film 2001, astronauts David Bowman and Frank Poole consider disconnecting the circuits of the onboard computer HAL when he appears to be mistaken in reporting the presence of a fault in the spacecraft's communication antenna. They attempt to conceal what they're saying from HAL, unaware that HAL has other plans. In contrast, Buck Rogers' AI pal Tweaky, who we heard at the end, is about as threatening as a waffle-knit tank top. But is AI, as we currently understand it, intelligent in any meaningful way? We first met James Bridle in the Taster episode of this third series. James is the author of Ways of Being and an artist and publisher whose work explores the ways in which the digital networked world reaches into the physical offline one. Their book, Ways of Being, presents a new way of thinking about intelligence.
I come from a sort of tech background. My background was in computer science. And it was my thinking about AI in large part which led me to consider the nature of intelligence. You know, I find it incredibly fascinating that we are so fascinated by AI, that AI has this immense hold over the popular imagination, let alone the sort of scientific and technological imagination. Most of that's terribly destructive because it's this awful science fiction imagining in the popular imagination, and it's this sort of route to capitalist power for the tech organizations and everything else. So it's not great, but it is fascinating. I've come to realize, I think, one of the reasons we're so fascinated by this is that we inherently recognize how strange and wonderful it is to think about non-human intelligence. And this is how most people think of non-human intelligence. When the subject of non-human intelligence comes up, it always comes down to AI, because that's the thing that's kind of within the popular sphere and the media gets talked about all the time. And as more and more things that are called AI, even if they're just applied statistics, kind of appear in the world, we get this ever stronger, stranger sense of non-human intelligence actually existing in the world. And it's just bizarre to me, but not necessarily surprising, that we don't turn that kind of idea on the rest of the world. That we don't understand that, like, first and foremost, if another form of intelligence is possible, machine intelligence, non-human machine intelligence, if that exists, if it's possible, which AI seems to suggest it is, for varying definitions of intelligence, then infinite forms of intelligence do exist. And that was my realization. That was my real kind of threshold moment that I stepped over, being like, oh, okay, well, if there's other ways of thinking other than the human, which AI is implied to be, then infinite ways of thinking are possible. And what a wondrous thing it would be to think about some of those, or rather to actually meet them by going and seeing all the other ways of intelligence that have always existed alongside us in this universe for much longer than we've been here. And so for me, AI is really a gateway of thinking about non-human intelligence. When it comes to like the slightly weirder questions of life, living, consciousness, and so on and so forth, I find myself in a really complex philosophical place when thinking about it, because on the one hand, I believe everything is intelligent and everything is alive, and I believe that fundamentally and thoroughly, and so AI in its wildest science fictional imagination, or the way tech bros talk about it, must be possible, right? Like it can exist. Do any of the things that actually exist at present manifest that in a way that I find to be meaningful and true? No. but they must remain the capacity to do so. Where does AI get its intelligence from? If as I believe, intelligence is connected to something that we might call spirit, or just life at its largest scale, that the intelligence descends into us from the universe that we are part of. If we just make it as a little AI toy, where does that come from? Where is that life force, that thing that animates everything on this planet? Well, one answer might be that it gets it from the world, just like we do. The computers that we use, they're made out of stone and silicon and plastics. They're made from the dead bodies of animals that existed billions of years ago. They're no less a part of the world than we are. One of the things I'm fascinated by is so many things. This line we draw between what is natural and unnatural. There is nothing unnatural in the world. Everything comes out of the earth, comes out of the universe. AI and us, and fungi and the stars. It's all just mattering, as Karen Barad would say. AI, at its wildest science fictional imagination, or the way tech bros talk about it, must be possible, right? Like it can exist. Do any of the things that actually exist at present manifest that in a way that I find to be meaningful and true? No.
Hey Siri, play John Elton's on Spotify.
This is Elton John now playing on Spotify.
No, Siri, play John Elton's, the Canadian avant-garde composer, on Spotify.
Now playing number 358. Jimmy Grief from Ellis James and John Robbins.
That doesn't make any sense at all. Siri, play John Elton's on Spotify.
Okay. Here's This is Elton John on Spotify.
No, Siri, play John Elton's, the Canadian avant-garde composer, on Spotify.
Okay, playing Peter Blake from This Cultural Life.
Hey Siri, play... just play Elton John.
This is Elton John now playing.
As James points out, it's curious that in our modern Western civilization, we find it far easier to consider programmed mechanical computerized systems possessing intelligence than the planet from which they emerged and all of the life forms on it. We've been taught to see nature as driven by blind forces and to fear that genuinely mechanized systems will soon turn us all into their slaves. True, we might entertain the idea that certain types of creatures have intelligence, like octopuses, dogs, and chimps, but only because we identify qualities in those creatures that we associate with human intelligence, like problem solving, playing games, showing empathy, and looking good in a waistcoat. In Ways of Being, James Bridle borrows a term from philosopher David Abram, the more than human world, and stresses the importance of recognizing that we are not at the pinnacle or top of anything, but exist within a larger world of relationships. Our ability to think is human-centred, but the universe is not human-centred. It is much more than that. There are many more expansive ways of thinking about and relating to the world that may in turn change our habits, in James's words, of treating the world and non-human things as dumb resources for us to use, but rather as intelligent beings that we are in relationship with. James presents a compelling case for treating the more than human world as being imbued with intelligence. After all, computer models for damming a river are no substitute for the skills and intelligence of a beaver. Our ventilation systems are nowhere near as sophisticated as those found in termite mounds. Watching the red arrows fly in unison is nothing compared to a murmuration of starlings. Conversely, teaching the likes of a nightingale, whose songs are deeply complex and varied, a human melody, is the equivalent of asking a ballet dancer just to hop on one leg. Sometimes, when it comes to the inherent intelligence of the natural world, we can't see the wood for the trees, as we're about to learn from the story of Clever Hans the horse.
Because, yeah, the story is absolutely that this horse was, and therefore its trainer, were very famous for being able to do maths. Essentially, the trainer would pose a mathematical question, the horse would tap its hoof the right number of times for the answer to the question. And, this toured around circuses and sideshows and stuff for a long time, until someone basically figured out that the horse was picking up on very subtle cues. Essentially, the horse would just tap its foot until it saw some tiny micro expression on the trainer's face and then would stop tapping. And what's amazing about this is that the trainer wasn't even aware they were doing it, right? The trainer, we're led to believe, completely believed in the capacity of the horse to do maths and wasn't aware they were giving this incredibly subtle clue. And this is often used as an example, really, of kind of human foolishness in ascribing this sort of intelligence to non-humans. But it's so much more interesting and complicated than that, because first of all, that's still a really smart horse, right? Like the horse maybe doesn't understand like the language of mathematics transliterated into English in order to be able to do this particular mathematical puzzle that humans have devised. It is, however, incredibly good at reading the body language of another species, the human, in order to give the response that it's required. It's learned something pretty complex and subtle in order to do that. It's one of the things that fascinates me is actually that many animals seem to be better at reading human expressions and feelings and emotions and all kinds of things than humans are. Octopuses, for example, can differentiate between different human faces, which humans can't do to octopuses, right? And most people who aren't familiar with horses probably can't differentiate between horses very well. So that's already pretty smart of the horse. The other thing is that the horse example really makes me think of is that it explodes our idea of intelligence as being something singular. And something that resides only inside the head, or even specifically within the brain or in the firing of neurons. Because what you actually have occurring in this example is you have an intelligent system composed of the trainer and the horse, right? Who are actually working together to produce the total outcome of this, which is an amazing trick and a piece of mathematics performed in a totally different way. In fact, by two beings working together as one intelligent system. And for me, that points to, one of many multiple definitions or ways of thinking about intelligence that we might get into, that it's not something that only goes on inside the head of an individual, and usually a human individual, but it's something much more complicated and implicated in kind of larger activities in the world.
Here's James with another example of that relational intelligence, this time between human and bird.
Researchers have long known that people in Africa cooperate with a wild bird called the greater honey guide. The bird shows people where to find bees' nests, which they harvest for their honey. The birds then feed on the wax combs left behind. New research, published in the journal Science, shows that this remarkable cooperative relationship involves two-way communication between humans and a free-living wild animal.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a really classic example of it's these little birds that live in large parts of Central Africa, and they like honey. But the local bees tend to build honeycombs, like construct them up in the branches of trees. And the honeybirds are quite small birds with quite small bills, and they can't break into the honeycomb. And so possibly for millennia, and possibly not just alongside humans, but now with humans, honey guides will go and fetch out a local human from the camp who is just walking around. And they will call to them, and they will direct their attention to a honeycomb by making certain calls, by kind of fluttering around. And even that interaction is already amazing. We know that the honey guides will approach much closer to humans than most other birds were, because the people who live in this region, they hunt birds with bows and arrows. They're very good at it, but they don't hunt honey guides, and the honey guides know it's safe to approach them. So they're already in that relationship. They also use a specific call that they don't use for any other purpose. They have a particular enunciation that they make, which is specifically aimed at attracting the attention of humans. And then there's a bunch of other kind of behavior, the way they fly, the way they kind of orient their bodies. And so they tell the human where the honeycomb is. And the humans then climb the tree, smoke out the hive. And when they've broken open the honeycomb, they leave some for the honey guide. And they're in relationship with them in this way. Humans also have this because this behavior is developed for so long. Humans also will call to honey guides. So a honey hunter will go out into the forest and will make a particular call And there's a few of these calls, in fact, documented in different areas. But the humans make a specific call, and it's been, scientifically documented that this call is not a sort of random noise. It's a noise that is understood by the honey guides because they respond to it, far more obviously than they do to any other calls as well. So there is a shared language between the birds and the humans, and then an activity that they participate in for mutual reward. And it's a beautiful thing, and it's one of the there's not a lot of really good documentation of these kind of activities, but I highly suspect that within history there's far more of them that we know about. And of course in fact the relationship that we have with domesticated animals today is obviously a much more advanced version of this original relationship, but this is not a relationship of domestication. This is a relationship between two essentially wild species, the human and the bird, who have perhaps slightly co-domesticated each other, but remain their own brilliant independent entities, but choose to cooperate very cleverly in order to perform this task.
James has given 2 examples of relational intelligence between humans and creatures. And why stop there? Could it exist between humans and plants? Here's John Lloyd again, followed by James.
They did this one-man show in 2013, and I become really interested in plant intelligence, and particularly the idea that barley might have domesticated us and not the other way around, because barley has very weak genes and can't survive on its own. It has to be looked after. And the deal that intelligent barley made was, you look after us and we'll give you beer. That'll be the treat. And beer is very, very old. I think it's even older than bread, beer. And it's the sort of start of civilization, the invention of beer. But if I gave interviews on what the show's about, people would laugh. You say, you think a bush is intelligent? Have you seen a clematis operating? We've got one over there. I mean, if that isn't intelligence, I'm a Dutchman. When, you sort of laugh at supposedly, I wouldn't call them primitive cultures. I think we've gone backwards in many ways, but the idea that everything contains a God, you see, I'm for that, because the idea that all life is sacred and everything it's all about definition of terms. What do you mean by God? If you think is within everything is an intelligence, a wisdom, a kind of an ability to solve problems. It's very hard to say, going back to the clematis, which is on our treehouse. I watched this thing grow, and you think, that is like a team of mountaineers, but it's flawless. It's not going to fall off. It's not going to make a mistake. And whatever problem you throw at it, it will solve it. I can't see the difference between that and a person solving a business problem at all.
One of the most mind-blowing stories that I've been learning about lately is research into various forms of plant hearing. I write about this a little bit in the book. There's some scientists who they recorded the sounds of caterpillars munching on a plant's leaves, and they saw that when the caterpillar attacks the plant in this way, the plant releases certain chemicals into the leaves that make the leaves taste bitter or whatever the caterpillar doesn't like, to discourage them. But they then subsequently discovered that they could take the caterpillars away, and at a later time they could just play the sound of the caterpillars in the room with the plant, and the plant would do the same thing. So plants hear, right? Which is already completely extraordinary and mind-blowing enough. But when I've been reading about subsequently, which kind of I find even more amazing, is that flowers hear. That flowers, in fact, may be in part not just these kind of beautiful colorful objects, but they're also auditory devices, that they receive sound, because scientists discovered that plants that they were working with, which were these little kind of sort of anemones or little flowers that grew along strands on sandy beaches, when they perceived the frequency of the wing beats of butterflies and moths, they would increase their nectar production. That at times of day, when moths were present and not when they weren't, the rate of nectar flow would increase. The flower hears the bee, hears the butterfly. It perceives the world at a level that we are completely incapable of perceiving at. And that without, this very intense scientific kind of reductionism, in order to reduce the world down to things like the frequency of a bee's wing and the flow rate of nectar within a flower, that's the only way really we can access that, or at least it's the only way we can access it through scientific right brain Western kind of descriptors of it. We can, of course, access it in other ways. We can access it as an act of kind of wonder and imagination of the flower that hears the bee. These are totally valid ways of understanding and thinking about these things. We may at times want or require certain forms of proof, again, within scientific or other frameworks that allow us to describe it in these very precise ways. But these are simply beings, wondrous things occurring all around us that we kind of choose our own ways of describing and thinking about and understanding. My work has led me to spend a lot of time thinking about the aliveness of things in this way. And really, although that book is about intelligence, it obviously extends. I'm using intelligence as kind of one way to talk about perhaps this quality of aliveness that I'm kind of aiming towards. And in the book, I also, I talk a lot about the intelligence of humans and non-humans, but also of things that we don't even consider to be sentient, like forests or oceans or entire planets, as Lovelock and Margulis did in the Gaia hypothesis. And really, there comes a point at which the language fails to capture the thing that you're describing. For me to speak of a mountain or the planet or the universe as being alive is utterly true. There's no sense for me in which I can imagine that not being the case. But yet to describe it in terms of aliveness, and also to be able to use the word alive in meaningful scientific terms as a term that splits things, because that's what reductionist scientific thinking does. It's what scientific language does. It's what language in general does. It's intended to differentiate between things, to split them apart so we can hold them at arm's length. But you can't hold the universe at arm's length, because we are inherently part of the universe and we are alive, and we have no problem saying we are alive, and we don't have too much trouble saying that most of the other moving, wriggling, flying, swimming creatures around the universe are alive. And then you get into and then you say, okay, well, we're going to define aliveness this way, and we're going to say this, this, and this, and therefore by that definition this thing lies outside that. But ultimately there's no outside to being alive, because we're all part of a living universe.
I try to have as few opinions as I can, but I haven't been able to shake this one off because I don't have a better explanation. I think that the universe is an intelligent entity.
Well, in 40 minutes, we seem to have gone from critiquing our Western biases for measuring intelligence with systems like IQ to considering the entire universe as intelligent. How the hell do we tie all of this together? Let's return to the themes at the beginning of the episode. Remember, Emma teaches workshops around the world that focus on recognizing the need for different types of intelligence in any system, such as a business. I asked her what the typical response was when she asked a team of people what their idea of intelligence was.
It's the ivory-towered professor who forgets to pick the kids up, who time is irrelevant. But in a team, you need someone like that who will go away, work on their own a little bit, and then bring new results and encourage change, because it's about the truth. And you need someone else who's the order drive, predominantly, who will put everything into a plan that everyone shares and agrees on. You need someone to communicate all of that stuff. You need someone to add targets and results to it. So you need every single one of those drives within a team. And you need someone who respects the past and respects the rituals and the traditions of the team and all of that. So they all have their place. And some people value some of those drives more than others, but that's because of their own lead drive, interestingly.
So, in regards to ourselves, we really do need to shake off the enduring image of the egghead, the academic, the scientist as the archetype of intelligence, and recognise its myriad forms, from kinesthetic and emotional to existential and creative. We need to transform our education systems to represent the many ways that children are able to demonstrate their intelligence, be it through dance, drumming, maths, art, creative writing, sport, or making a guinea pig out of fuzzy felt. And what about AI? In our opening taster episode for this series, James points out that our computer systems, being closed, aren't even capable of producing genuinely random numbers, To do this, they need to be connected to the outside world. Also, there is as yet no so-called AI that can understand what's being asked of it without that being programmed into it from the outset. Surely it is computers we should be thinking of, not nature, as sophisticated mechanized systems driven by blind forces. It is not animals or humans who, as Richard Dawkins put it, are little more than lumbering robots, but robots. At the crux of this episode is our desperate need to reframe and expand our idea of intelligence to the ecological. As James Bridle puts it in Ways of Being, to define intelligence simply as what humans do is the narrowest way we could possibly think about it, and it is ultimately to narrow ourselves. By expanding our definition of intelligence, we might allow our own intelligence to flower into new forms and new emergent ways of being that would, ultimately, prevent us from treating the world as a mere resource to be plundered. That we might consider the entire universe as intelligent is perhaps a topic for a future episode. But as James reminds us in Ways of Being, everything in the universe is, after all, hitched to everything else. Or as the philosopher Alan Watts liked to put it, you don't get intelligent organisms growing in an unintelligent environment.
The voices that surround us are as loud as they ever were if you choose to listen to them. That way of perceiving and understanding the world, it never went away. We just stopped listening so closely, and we're entirely capable of picking up that thread again. I mean, the one thing that anyone can do is just simply spend more time paying attention to the activities of all the creatures and other beings around us. I mean, at the individual level, it's the most rewarding and most challenging thing one can do is simply to put one's trust into this intelligence and the way that exists in the world and have a kind of open awareness. You know, what one pays attention to grows. I think that's Octavia Butler. Becomes more powerful the more you become aware of it. If you start with the idea that so much of the world that surrounds us is already intelligent and is just sort of waiting to show us how intelligent it is, if we give it the credit and pay it enough attention and relax some of our preconceived notions about what constitutes that intelligence, then it always sort of reveals itself to us in the most extraordinary ways. But you can do this really fun, interesting work of picking which lens you want to see the universe with. Today I'm going to be a scientist and I'm going to perceive the world as a scientist and I'm going to record it and analyze it and speak of it as a scientist. And therefore, as a scientist, there are only certain things I can say about the world. And the next day, I can take up an entirely different lens. And with no contradiction between those two things, I can say, well, today I'm going to speak as a shaman, or I'm going to speak as a panpsychist, or whatever you want to do. And I'm going to use a different register and a different way of understanding the world to arrive at things which are no less true within the framework with which I am speaking. And that for me is the exciting possibility, because really all of this is not about what we say or the way in which we even exchange that information between us. It is the way in which we behave. What are the results of thinking the world this way? How does it change us, and how does it change our relationships to the world? And first and foremost, one of the things that changes is it makes it very hard to be a hard-nosed, human-centric extractivist, right? Because immediately you become vastly more aware of all of these different relationships in which you are implicated and the effects that they have on you as well. And that, for me, is the kind of greatest revelation of expanding one's notion of intelligence or aliveness or whatever else it is. It changes how you experience the world around you, and therefore it changes you at a fundamental level.
Adventures in Newtopia was produced and presented by me, David Bramwell, with music from Oddfellows Casino. For more info, go to drbramwell.com or contact me on Twitter @DrBramwell. Huge thanks to all of my guests in this episode and for the support of Hawkwood College. The idea of Newtopia was established by John and Yoko in 1973 as a place with no boundaries and whose international anthem is silence. Gratitude and support to our friends at Journey to Newtopia for their role in our provenance. This podcast is made possible by the generous sponsorship of Druids. What, you say? What, the award-winning international folk band from County Kildare? No. Oh, the 70s prog rock band from Berkhamsted who once appeared on the Old Grey Whistle Test? No. The contemporary Iowa-based metal band whose albums include Cycles of Mobium and Spirit Compass? No. Genuine Druids. These are people from all walks of life who have a shared love and respect for the natural world and celebrate 8 special festival times during the year. People who work to develop their creativity, to foster community and compassion, and to study spiritual teachings that draw their inspirations from the natural world. People who are interested in meditation, mysticism and magic as means to improve their lives and the lives of others. People who are often engaged in projects to preserve, protect and restore the natural world and celebrate the creative arts. Do you get to wear cool robes and carry a staff? You can if you want, it isn't compulsory. Interested? Find out more at druidry.org.